So guys, Fishtank PC cases. They're everywhere. Every single PC building brand has made a fish tank or aquarium-like case in 2023 or 2024 just to sell more and follow the market. And every single cheap PC flipper in your area is probably selling a gaming PC for way too much money for the hardware that's inside in a cheap aquarium-like case with no brand or with strange names, just to try and convince the little kid looking for his first PC to get it. Now, I know I may sound like a hypocrite making this video with a high to Y60 aquarium-like case in the background, but hear me out. Here's why fish tank cases are actually being pretty bad for the PC building market, and here's why you probably shouldn't buy one unless you're getting a really high-end one. Let's get started. Now, first of all, I've always been a big fan of dual chamber cases, okay? Especially when Corsair was making their first one, like the 680X. I loved these cases, and I think relocating the PSU on the back, lowering down the system, and just separating the hardware was a very good idea. However, I kind of liked the idea of having a front intake, even in dual chambers. Now, the intake position is going to be the main issue with fish tank cases, because if you relocate the intake on the side without actual proper design to basically make the airflow go around, what's going to happen if you just think about it, is going to be you're going to have no direct air on the components. So of course the case with proper designed fan placement is still going to have an intake and outtake of air, which is going to work, and it's going to keep the temperature inside at the appropriate level. However, you're not going to have a lot of air, you know, just going through your GPU, going over your RAM, going over your VRMs on your motherboard, and going over all those little components which are not actively cooled by design, but quite simply because they expect you to have some airflow in your system. And I think that in the long term is going to damage, or at least, you know, not do good for your hardware, especially if you're running a pretty high-end system or even a low-end system, and if you have it overclocked or running a bit high. That's why I was so critical of PC flippers using budget aquarium cases for questionable builds. For example, if you go with an older Xeon or an older i7, like I also do on the channel in my low-end PC builds, take a look at the sub 200 one, for example. I used a normal case in it, even though it was less aesthetically pleasing, because if you use older high-end hardware, which I agree with is a great buy, the problem is it is still high-end hardware, so it draws a lot of power, a lot of heat. And even if you have your CPU cooled, your motherboard's VRM, the voltage regulators where the power goes through, they're gonna heat up. And if you don't have good airflow over them, they're gonna get damaged in the long run, and they can even throttle your CPU down and lose you performance doing some phantom throttling, some things which may not be as easy to check, to notice. And it's not gonna be good. You're losing performance just for a bit of aesthetic, pretty much. First problem is design itself. Now, tied into that is people say, okay, but the side intake, if set as an intake, which you should, by the way, if you have an aquarium case, you want the fans on the side to be as intake. It's the best configuration for GPU temperature, especially if your GPU is vertical, and it's also the best configuration for overall airflow, even though it's not as intuitive, but it actually is, unless you have a very good intake from the bottom, like we have on my high to Y60. I will try to show you the footage from my personal build being built, and I have Arctic fans on the bottom doing all the intake work. Getting back into it, even if you have side intake, the problem is going to be, it's not going to be as good as having an intake from the front of your standard case with mesh. Why? Because if you take a look at the back cutouts, well, first of all, on the back, you have the back panel, but you also have stuff. So you're not just directly intaking air from the outside, you're intaking it from the back panel. So the airflow overall is going to be less. But another problem is going to be the kind of mesh which you have on the back. Again, remember, this is your back panel, it's not a front panel with a tiny mesh. There's going to be less pull-through in general, especially on those cheaper aquarium-like cases. The mesh on the back is done completely at random. They just cut into the aluminum with no air filter, so you can get all the dust inside your PC. I've seen some aquarium cases after 1 year of use, and they are full of dust because they don't have good filters, because they are cheap cases coming from China for $20 per case, micro ATX case, so they use less aluminum. And what are you expecting from such a case? I've done a build recently using a cheap Amazon case, which is not an aquarium case, but still, it had all these design flaws, like badly cut aluminum, bad intake. It's better to buy from a reputable brand. So going with a cheap fish tank case, it's a bad idea. But since they look so nice, because they have all the glass, people buy them, and that's a problem. But it's all due to the fault of the aesthetic of the aquarium PC looking so nice. Now, another big problem, which is again due to airflow location, is gonna be air cooling. So another thing I see all the time is people who are reselling PCs, even shops, they do cheap aquarium cases with air cooling. And now guys, aquarium cases are made, with the exceptions of high-end cases like the NZXT Flow series, which has some design elements to mitigate it, but they are made for water cooling. I remember when the High 2i60 first came out, Gamers Nexus, they tested it with an air cooler because they wanted to to put to the test height properly, and the results were not the best. They did it on purpose to showcase the weakness of this design. So if you're buying an aquarium case, please get an all-in-one water cooler, okay? Even a cheap one, but it's gonna just be better due to airflow. It's gonna just be a lot better. But if you're buying an all-in-one water cooler, you may still have issues. Why? Because the side doesn't have as good of a support for all-in-ones as a front of a normal case would have. And that's the same, even on high-end cases. So I'll show you what happened when I tried to go ahead and put basically two all-in-one in a Lian Li O11 dynamic case. So one of the most expensive aquarium cases of the time. I was building a very high-end PC with an RTX 4090 Matrix, basically the $3,000 RTX 4090 graphene cooled by a ROG. And we had a 360 all-in-one on top. And I wanted to put the 360 of the Matrix 4090 on the side. But to do that, I had to compromise all the connectors of the motherboard on the side. I could not connect the USB 3. And that's because the side is usually a bit receding compared to the motherboard. But if you put a radiator there and not just fans, it's gonna just actually come over your motherboard in front of it. And so it's gonna just lock out some case functionality. Now, of course, if you have a height case, they made their own radiator for the side, the thick Q60, which I have yet to test, but that's specifically designed for it. And that's not gonna be the case on the mid-range and the lower-end aquarium-like cases. So you need to be careful if you want to put multiple radiators on it, or even if you want to put a single one, I wouldn't plan on putting it on the side. And what's the problem with not putting it on the side? Well, same problem with normal cases. Sometimes your radiator doesn't fit on top. Why? If your motherboard has big heatsinks and your radiator is a bit thicker, you're gonna have issues mounting it on the top. So this opens a lot of compatibility issues if you're building the PC properly, which is why a lot of people put an air cooler on it, but the air cooler is not optimal for the aquarium-like cases. You can see why a lot of problems originate from this. Another small issue is, well, in such a pretty looking case, you wanna see your fans. You do not wanna see the back of your fans. So people do not put intake fans, which can be seen because they look uglier. That results in them having all outtake fans, because it's how they look better, unless you have a reverse blade fans like we've had on the XPG Invader BTF case. Again, as you can see, I cover a lot of aquarium cases, but I try to build them properly. If you do, and if they are cases from reputable brands, you're gonna be fine. Buying a cheap case is something you can do in 2024 and 2025, because cases have come down a lot in price, but it's easier to find a good traditional cheap case. I've covered a lot on the channel, like the Montec case, the Silence case, Gamdia's regular size case. Again, it's full of good brands with good cases. But if you want to go really cheap, I wouldn't buy an aquarium one. Either way, these guys end up with a fully negative pressure build with all the fans pushing the air out, which results in dust coming in from every single hole of the PC, cooling performance and GPUs overheating, especially if vertical mounted. Vertical mounted GPUs everywhere are another issue, honestly. And again, the worst mesh can actually be on the back as well, because remember, your power supply is now on the back, generally side mounted. And so very often we have overheating PSUs as well. So this is why I don't love the fish tank case trend, but I want to hear your opinion down below. Again, I don't think it's all negative. I think the high-end models are great. I, however, think that the cheaper cases, which originated from wanting to imitate the higher-end models, are not the best, shouldn't be bought. And I don't like people who are making PCs with those and selling them for too high of a price just because it looks nice. But again, let me know down below, and if you watched the video this far and you heard me complaining for 10 minutes without closing it, maybe drop a like and subscribe to watch more of my videos. I promise I'm not always complaining, and I hope to see you guys again, really, if you liked it. Bye bye.